Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And during this video we're going to discuss the most important statements that were made as a result of the NATO Summit that took place on the territory of Hark. Furthermore, we're going to discuss very interesting documents and papers that were signed by Zelensky. During this video, we are going to talk also about the situation in the area of the Special Military Operations Zone. According to information we have, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians once again managed to improve their positions, and they managed to improve their positions at some directions significantly. So let's start, and first let's talk about the results of the NATO Summit, and probably the most important statement was made by the 15th Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte. He stated that he promises, more precisely, that alliance can fund Ukraine for another decade. Obviously, this is a very big number. 10 years of war on the territory of Ukraine is too big. Even too big for Ukraine, even too big for Zelensky himself. Obviously, he doesn't want this war to continue for so long. Obviously, this will lead to complete collapse of the state of Ukraine. Another important statement, another important document that was signed during the previous 12 hours is that Vladimir Zelensky and Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Alan Berset, signed an agreement on the establishment of a special tribunal for crimes of Russian aggression against Ukraine. This is a very important document, and obviously the European countries will try to use this mechanism, use this paper in the future after the war in Ukraine finishes. Another important article was published by Bild. According to them, according to this Western media, NATO Summit in the Hark was unsuccessful for Zelensky. He was only a bystander. Zelensky was invited only as a spectator. There was no separate working session dedicated to the war in Ukraine, the German publication emphasizes. Zelensky is only a secondary figure at the summit this year. No invitation to working sessions, no new billion-dollar aid packages, no statement on the prospects for Ukraine to join NATO. One thing is clear. For the sake of a peace agreement with Russia, Trump is ready to deny Zelensky NATO membership as a part of a deal with the Kremlin. So this is the situation, and this is basically the final result of this probably NATO summit regarding Ukraine. And the most interesting, I would like to remind you that yesterday Zelensky had a talks with the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. And according to Zelensky, he discussed with Trump ways to end the war in Ukraine. So as you can see, from one side, Zelensky is trying to find a solution how to finish the war in Ukraine. But from the other side, we see that Chief Rutte promises Zelensky that alliance can fund Ukraine for another decade. So now Zelensky must make a decision whether to follow the path that's proposed by the United States of America or by the NATO organization. And when talking about Russian Federation, according to different sources, they can continue a war with Ukrainians for a very long period of time as well. Stressful and difficult summer ahead for Ukraine, NATO official warns. A tense and difficult summer awaits Ukraine on the battlefield. According to NATO, Russia will continue its slow advance in the Sumi and Zaporozhye regions. No breakthrough are expected on the front due to the lack of reserves. Weapons production in Russia remains strong, 130 tons a month, 3 million shells a year. The US plans 1 million a year by 2026. Russia is capable of financing the war until 2027. These prospects for a diplomatic solution are weak as NATO doubts Russia's readiness to negotiate. So despite the fact that Rutte promises another decade of supply for Ukraine, we see that the Russians are able to do the same and probably even more. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but as for now, let's finish with the political updates and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Sumi direction. Very interesting situation is happening here right now. This morning, the Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, published his article regarding the situation in this area, and Syrsky stated that the situation in the Sumi direction was completely stabilized. He's saying that the Russians are no longer moving further in the direction of the city of Sumi, and at the same time, the Ukrainians are not counterattacking. So this is the statement of Syrsky, but today several pro-Russian resources reported, very reliable sources reported, that in Yunakiivka, Sumi region, organized resistance to the of the Ukraine armed forces has been broken. Currently, Russian landing forces are clearing the southern part of the village. So the Russians are saying that maybe today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but obviously during the next several days, the Russians will announce complete control over the settlement of Yunakiivka, which is completely different to the words that were stated by the commander-in-chief of Ukraine, Syrsky. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction, and as we discussed in the previous video, a very interesting situation is taking place in the vicinity of the city by the name of Volchansk. I would like to remind you that yesterday we got this very interesting and strange video, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were trying to prepare strongholds, some positions below the bridge along the river of Volcha to the west of the northern part of the city of Volchansk itself. So here we can see how Ukrainians are trying to dig in deeper to prepare the defense belt before possible Russian offensive operation. Who knows what exactly the Ukrainians were doing with this. But anyway, several hours later we got another video published, this time by the Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see lots of episodes how Russians were attacking Ukrainians in different parts of let's say the area of the special military operation zone, and in some at some point, this is the moment, we can see how Russian soldiers were attacking railways. So this episode was geolocated, and Russian soldiers were moving from this forest, from this side of the river of Volcha, in the direction of these railways, and the Ukrainians were bombing them. So as we can see, yesterday the Ukrainians were trying to create a stronghold in this area. Maybe they managed to finish this process, and let's say by the evening of the previous day, the Russians managed to take control over those strongholds that were prepared by the Ukrainians. This is very important because this is a first foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volchansk. As for now, we don't say, and we can't say for sure, whether the Russians are going to begin offensive operation further in the direction of this industrial zone or not, but maybe the Russians will try. They will try to test Ukrainian defense, because if the Russians are able to establish complete control over this industrial zone, let's say if the Russians are able to take these territories under complete control, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of Ukrainian defense in the city of Volchansk itself. So let's wait and see, obviously. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Constantinovka direction. As for the previous 12 hours, the most important updates took place along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal. Currently there are very heavy clashes for this dense network of the fortifications between the settlement of the northern Deliivka and the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal itself. And several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians during the previous night managed to finish the battle for the Ukrainian, for the bank of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal that is located on the Ukrainian side. So these territories were completely secured by the Russians. As for this article, we haven't adjusted anything because several mappers several weeks or days ago already reported about complete control over these territories. So that is why we're not changing anything. We're just saying that something is happening here right now, and most likely the Russians are going to finish the battle for this territory in the very near future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And according to information we have, the Russians continue advancing from the settlement of Novosergeyevka in the northern direction. Currently, the Ukrainians control this very important stronghold, this one, and this is the base of Ukrainian defense in this direction, and this stronghold allows the Ukrainians to control the situation and not to allow the Russians to move further deep inside of the Dnipropetrovsk region, and more precisely in the direction of the railways and the road TO406 that lays between the, let's say, the city of Zaporozhye and the city of Pokrovsk. So now the Russians, as you can see, are trying to outflank this stronghold from the north, and soon we're gonna see first updates exactly about this area. The Russians most likely, as soon as they finish the outflanking operation, will try to attack this stronghold from the north and from the northeast and from the northwest, with the purpose to cut supply and support of this territory and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the western direction. Control over this stronghold will allow the Russians to move further in the northern direction towards the settlements of Molodetsk and Udachna, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation, but this time from the east in the western direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the pockets that's located between the settlements of Andreevka, Alexeyevka, Zelený Kut. And today the pro-Ukrainian sources published another article regarding the situation on the ground. If you remember yesterday, those days we talked a lot that most of the sources adjusted these territories in Russian favor long time ago, and there was just one source in the world, we're talking about Deep State, who denied any changes on the ground. And today they were forced to make their corrections on their map, and they explained their corrections because soldiers on the ground and the sources from the ground were providing them the wrong information. Basically, the units and brigades and soldiers along the line of combat contact of the armed forces of Ukraine were lying to Deep State about the situation on the ground. So that is why they didn't color the territory. And now, because the situation that the truth was revealed, they were forced to make additional adjustments. Anyway, we are waiting for additional changes because most likely this pocket is about to collapse completely. The sources reported that the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Zirka, and today we start receiving the first updates and first geolocations of how the Russians are bombing and attacking this territory, how the Russians try to destroy as many as possible Ukrainian positions, equipment, vehicles, with the purpose to ease additional progress on the ground of the armed force of the Russian Federation. So as for now, we don't have anything that confirms whether the Russians managed to get the first buildings or not, but one thing we know for sure, that the Russians are moving in this direction and that the battle for the village of Zirka is going to start very soon. Now we are moving to the most important area. The most important updates of the previous 12 hours are coming from the village of Shevchenko. Today, Russian sources published this video. The video is very long, 4 minutes and 35 seconds long, the biggest video ever. And in this video, we can see how the Russians were fighting for the village of Shevchenko. This video is very long, as I told you, and we have lots of different episodes, how the Russians were bombing this territory, how the Russians were attacking Ukrainian positions with FPV drones, how the Russians were clearing this territory with stormtroopers, and in the final part of this video, as usually, we can find lots of episodes how Russians were raising their flags in different parts of the settlement of Shevchenko. So this is a very important victory for the armed force of the Russian Federation, because by taking under control the settlement of Shevchenko, the Russians captured not just the village, the Russians managed to secure the biggest lithium deposit in the world or in Europe. So the Russians managed to take this deposit under complete control, and I would like to remind you that according to the latest agreement between the United States of America and Ukraine, this lithium deposit used to be probably under control or under the responsibility or in the area of interest of the agreements about the rare metals that were signed by Ukraine and the United States of America. And the Russians managed to take this deposit under complete control. Obviously, the Russians are not going to use the deposit right now because the line of combat contact is very close. Obviously, they're going to do this after the end of the special military operation, but this is very important victory for the Russians that can deal damage to this agreement between the United States of America and Ukraine. At the same time, according to several sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions not just on the territory of the village of Shevchenko, but around this village as well. Farms between the village of Shevchenko and Vilne Polye were also taken by the Russians, according to several pro-Russian resources, and the Russians managed to improve their positions further in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Voskresenka. So this is the situation, this direction. We see that the Russians continue their offensive, and we see that the Russians are not planning to stop their offensive and they are going to move further. And we have additional changes on the ground in the Zaporozhye direction. Today, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to secure completely the southern part of the settlement of Malinovka. As for now, without proofs, but we believe that this is the situation on the ground, and the Russians are going to continue offensive operation further in the northern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over these territories. And I would like to remind you once again that the NATO organization is able to provide assistance to Ukraine for another decade. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.